Hey everyone, my name is Poisonblade and I hope all of you are having a nice day. So for today's video, I'm again not going to be building any animal habitats today. However, I am going to be building an importing house, which is probably not the correct term or name for it. But I'm also going to be building a brothel. I've built 3 brothels so far, including this one, and I have to say, I don't have a problem. However, today's video I'm mostly going to be talking about the world that I've built to be where most of my projects are set in, all except Isla Pacifica. Isla Pacifica is kind of the odd one out and it doesn't belong in this world. So yeah, with that being said, let's get straight into today's video. So I said in the last video that I was going to talk about the story of Arcado. Arcado is a place in this world that I've created. But then I realized that, first of all, the plot points in that story constantly changed, like I was constantly adding and removing stuff, so then I thought like, oh, I should probably like straighten out the plot points first before I tell you guys the story, because, I mean, Hakim's cat in the last video probably changed names in that video 3 times, just in that video alone, and then changed names 2 times after the video was up, so probably should straighten out the story first. And also, I was going to talk about nations and such, or at least going to mention nations, and then it was also dawning on me like, oh, I should probably first introduce those nations, and should probably just introduce the world that I've built up. And before anyone asks, yes, this is mostly completely unnecessary info, like you can watch these projects without any of this in your brain, but I like to tell stories with my builds. I like to envision this entire world, and I always want to say, if I ever get the chance to write a book, I will never write about myself. I really just want to write stories about this fantasy world that I've created. So let's get started with the first one, which is referenced in the importing house, because this is Conterno's importing house in Kayan al-Bashar. So this is run by a family that is from Conterno, and they import goods from Conterno to Kayan al-Bashar. For a lot of these places or nations that I will come up with, I had like, oh, there's this city, and there's this cultural thing and this historical thing and such. Conterno really just was, oh yeah, it's inspired by one city actually. Like, Conterno is a weird thing actually. Like, Conterno is, well, all of the other countries and nations I've come up with so far are like inspired by lands and countries. Conterno is inspired by one city, and it's Florence, or as Assassin's Creed has taught me to say it, Firenze. And the only thing that I could come up with for Conterno is Blake. Like, that's everything. I even named the capital of Conterno because I was just like, I don't know anything so far. So yeah, Conterno, nicknamed the City of Books, just, you know, I'm not going to say why it's nicknamed the City of Books. It's not because of libraries though, that's, I can tell you. But this is a thing that's kind of common with the stories that I like to come up with. I deliberately like to leave things vague so that you can sort of guess what is there. Like, I of course know the actual official answer to it, but I just like to leave people guessing so that it's not like all handed to you. But yeah, Conterno is right now in the midst of a plague, and I actually managed to make this work into this build as well, because there's some sad and cruel realism in today's build, because as soon as I get to the back, this building was being like extended, like business was booming, so the people who are running this business were expanding it. But then the plague happened in Conterno, and just because these people were connected to Conterno, the builders just said like, oh, you're from that place, you're probably like, in some weird way, you are infected by the plague, so we will stop building because we don't want to get sick. But the real reason is that the builders were racist or discriminatory. Yeah, this is just a thing I like to say right off the bat. I don't want to make a utopia. I don't want to create a perfect world. I want to create a world that feels real and gritty and has its dark points. Of course, has its beautiful points, but like, I don't want to create this utopia. But yeah, that's all I really came up with for Conterno. And it's just plague. I have no idea. Like, I will probably come up with other things, but right now it's just plague. all of these other places. Historical facts, cultural things. Conterno, blank. That's it. But anyway, moving on to another country, because I have to get to these a little bit faster, because otherwise I won't be able to talk about the brothel, because I want to talk about the brothel, because of course I want to. I mean, it's Poisonblade. I want to talk about the brothel. I want to talk about the interesting stuff. A lot of these nations or countries that I'm going to mention won't ring any bells, but then when I go further into them, then they will start ringing bells. So starting off with Byzantium. Clear reference to what that place was inspired by, or at least the name, but Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire doesn't really ring any bells on itself, but then we're right now building its capital. Because Kayan al-Bashar is supposed to be the capital of the Byzantine Empire, or Byzantium is supposed to be the largest country or the largest nation. However, it doesn't really, it's not the most powerful one, because a large part of this nation is desert. I mean, Kayan al-Bashar. And Kayan al-Bashar has a rivalry with it's kind of just a constant combat between these two cities when it comes to who's the biggest, who's the strongest, who's the most important, economical and just overall. But the second most important city, or in some cases the first, this just constantly switches by day. But the other city is Colonia, which already actually gives a little bit of a hint towards Kayan al-Bashar's, but in most cases Byzantium's history, because a lot of places, including Kayan al-Bashar, actually used to be colonies. So Byzantium basically started out as a lot of small colonies and then broke free from its overlord, which is Arcado, which I mentioned I was going to talk about, but then I needed to set up the world first before I talked about any stories involving this world. Arcado is this, it used to be one island nation off the coast of Byzantium, but now, due to constant raiding by another country or nation, not really a nation, because it's a group of multiple small kingdoms, but usually clustered together. But Arcado is constantly raided by the people from Noscador, and just to quickly explain Noscador, Valhalla. Yeah, Valhalla is however not a town or a city in Noscador, it's a valley, but I have since named the town that I'm building in Valhalla, and I've named it Torstedt. And yeah, Noscador is constantly raiding Arcado, because Arcado used to be this very wealthy place, and I always want to say the mountains and hills of Arcado used to be drowning in gold, enough gold to make a Basharian nobleman shit his pants. But all of the gold mysteriously disappeared, or at least it was turned into common rock, even if that gold was no longer in Arcado. So just imagine the surprise when you open your jewelry box and it's nothing but rocks. But anyway, Arcado, as I said, used to be one of the strongest powers in this world. Now, however, it's broken into multiple independent city-states. Along these city-states, this is history-wise, but there are the 4 shadow cities. These used to be the 4 most important cities, and here you will recognize one name, because one of these cities is Tianopolis. These 4 cities used to be the most important or the biggest cities. Tianopolis was never the capital though. It was mostly lobbed in with these 3 other cities, because Tianopolis was a very religious center. It was by far the smallest, however. The capital was 5-6 times the size of Tianopolis, so you can imagine how large the capital was. But these 4, the big 4 cities, are now called the shadow cities, and yeah, this is a dark thing, because all of the gold in Arcado turned into common rock. However, in the big 4 cities, or the shadow cities, it's rumored that all of the gold is still there. That all of that gold that Arcado used to be famed for, and it used to be their base of power and wealth, all of the gold that was there. In the 4 shadow cities, the gold is still there. But then the last adventuring group that went into Tianopolis, actually, it was a party of 23, and only 1 man was found, and they wanted to ask what happened to the other 22 people that went into Tianopolis. but they didn't really want to press too far because this man had seemingly with his own hands clawed his eyes out, or gouged his own eyes out. They couldn't really get a word out of him anyway because he was speaking in this weird growl-ish, well, not really a language, or at least not recognizable by anyone. The only thing that he said constantly in the common tongue or common language was, "They have seen me, they have seen me, they have seen me." He constantly mumbled that. And he of course met a sticky end. Yeah, don't go to the Shadow Cities, and in reality this is literally just an explanation for why you will never see Tianopolis on the channel again, but I like to just build up these stories to explain things, but also leave things vague, because I am never going to say what is in these Shadow Cities, who are they. I'm never going to say anything, because I could also just easily say that the Shadow Cities are basically just a nightmare bedtime story. I really like to leave things vague. I like to leave things so that people guess what is actually happening. And also, yes, if this was a video game, the Shadow Cities would definitely be like an endgame dungeon. I totally see that. But anyway, moving on to other cities, because I want to talk about the Brothel, or other countries or nations. So I already mentioned Noscador, I already mentioned Conterno, which, again, Conterno is just Blake. Then there's also Hadrias, which I haven't really done much about. Now we're getting into the countries and nations that I haven't fully fleshed out. Not that any one of these is fleshed out. Now we're getting into the more open-ended ones. But Hadrias, in comparison to all of the other countries and nations, Hadrias isn't like a kingdom, but it's a principality. Not that there's there's a big difference between that, but Hadrias is a principality, and for some reason I came up with the city of Satros. Conterno is west of Azantium, or, well, the empire that is behind Kayan al-Bashar. And Hadrias is to the south of Conterno, still bordering Azantium. So Conterno is also bordering Azantium. And then we go into the last one, which is literally a name that I can't pronounce myself, because, I mean, Conterno and Hadrias are supposed to be influenced by Italian, Conterno being directly referenced from Florence. But then Tagues, or Tagues, I can't say this. This is supposed to be said with a French accent, but Tagues is a kingdom. It's the smallest one. It's kind of the forgotten one. Nobody really cares about this. It's just kind of left there. But I envision that Tagues is to the southwest of Azantium. So there's probably a couple nations in between Hadrias and Tagues, but I've only come up with the name of Tagues. And again, it's supposed to be said with a French accent, but I literally just now come up with names that I can't pronounce myself. So that's going to be fun. And then the final one, which is actually deliberately left unnamed, is known from Ozaru. Ozaru is this small trading post, and this nation is far, almost beyond the explored maps. Only Ozaru is really known, and I wanted to leave this vague because it was discovered by Arcado in the heydays of Arcado, when Arcado was a single nation. So that's, I would like to say, 800 years ago. And after that there was just enough chaos in this part of the world that nobody really explored that. But yeah, the only thing that I really wrote up about this unnamed empire far beyond the borders of the explored maps is Ozaru and silks. For some reason it's just silks, and especially this, in question marks I placed dragons. Why? Don't know. So that's literally just the countries and nations that I have since come up with. Again, the world behind Kayan al-Bashar, behind Valhalla and such, is much larger, and if I ever get the chance to write a book, I will probably write about the stories that I come up with for this world and not about myself, because I mean, my life is pretty boring and I like to just, lose myself in this world and in these stories, because that's the builds I really like. Of course, building in Plan 2, I like just building things. Building things with the stories in the background is where I get the most fun. So building that importing house and including that reference to the plague that is happening in its home country. I really love doing that. And then now, this brothel. Yeah, I just like the thing of like, I mean, this build is right next to the Squirrel's Tavern, and I just like the idea of people getting drunk at Squirrel's Tavern and then mistakenly walking into the import house and not into the brothel. Because the brothel is right next to it. However, there is a building in between the two builds of today. That is a scrapped build. It didn't look right. It was just bumpy in the weird places and such. I'm still trying to learn to not make things like symmetrical and such. And not make things just like one rectangle. But it's kind of still like a learning process to do that. Yeah, so just to run down all of the countries so far. Azantium, known from Kayan al-Bashar. And actually I just want to quickly mention Istar, which I've nicknamed, like Istar is another city in Azantium, and I nicknamed it the City of Lilies. I'm not going to tell the backstory, but it's not a good one. Well, it's kind of like it gives the idea that's like going to be a nice backstory, but it isn't. And then you have Arcado, known from Tianopolis, Shadow Cities, which you don't want to go into unless you want to gouge your own eyes out. Noscador, Valhalla, Conterno, Plague, and Hadrias, Principality, Tagwest, country that I can't pronounce myself. And then Mystery Empire, far beyond the explored corners of the map. Now, quickly talking about this brothel, like, when it comes to this world, like, this is actually also true for me in real life. I don't really like to listen to, like, stories of, like, kings and queens and such, like, that's in the history books. I like to listen or hear the stories of the people who you don't usually see, such as the prostitutes or the sex workers. I mean, just imagine the stories that the prostitutes in Kayan al-Bashar would be able to tell, because they are like they are connected to like this world of scheming and manipulating and everything, but they're not really part of that world. So the stories that they could tell, and then also like, I mean, Hakim, the tavern keeper from Squirrel's Tavern, like these stories that he could tell. Like, I like to have the stories that aren't the kings and the queens and are just basically the history books. I like to basically make up the stories of the people behind everything, the people who aren't usually seen. And also, yeah, I think when it comes to Kayan al-Bashar, this brothel so far, which I've nicknamed the Brothel of the Blooming Lily, again going with the lily thing, which again isn't the best thing because, yeah, I'm just going to talk about that later because it is connected to the story of Arcado, which I still have to kind of, you know, set straight how that is going to go. This brothel is so far the only one who has like a core chart and can actually be like guarded easily. Yeah, just think of this. This brothel is more guarded than most places in Kayan al-Bashar. I just like to build these kinds of things where it's like, it's not the things that you quickly think of when you think of like nations and fantasy worlds. It's usually like the things that are kind of like the extras to it. But anyway, that's going to be it for today's video. Again, I just really like to now envision all the stories that the prostitutes at this brothel can tell you. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do and could make any sense of what I said, you know, there's the like and subscribe button, there's a bell button, which, yeah, doesn't usually work. Like, it's supposed to notify you whenever there's a new upload, but it usually doesn't. But anyway, have a nice day everyone, and bye bye.